Welcome to Bunny Hugs and Mental Health, the podcast that deals with all things mental health. We talk to professionals, survivors, and loved ones about their sometimes informative, sometimes uplifting, and sometimes tragic stories. I'm your host of the show, Todd Rennebaum, advocate, recovering addict, experienced sufferer of depression and anxiety, and author of the children's book, Sometimes Daddy Cries. Hello, I'm Todd Rennebaum, and you are listening to Bunny Hugs and Mental Health on the Saskatchewan Podcast Network. And this week I got a kind of a different one. It still involves mental health, but it involves mental health with frontline workers in our prison system here in the province and with those that are incarcerated. I am speaking to Kayleigh Lafontaine. She's the executive director at the Elizabeth Fry Society of Saskatchewan. And one of their things is the abolishment of prisons. Now, the strange thing about her being the executive director of something like this is she's actually a former corrections officer. So she's been there. She's frontline work, and she sees things differently now, and she'd like to help those incarcerated and those that work in prisons. But before I play that, I would just like to give a big thank you to Annabelle at Penny University Bookstore. She's at 3104 13th Avenue, phone number 639-571-2186. You can go on their website, pennyu.ca, and shop for books there. Or, like I said, you can go to her address there on 13th Avenue and shop for books. And thank you, Annabelle, for another week of sponsorship. And one more thing, I'd like to give a shout out to my friend Heather Bellog for sharing and saying some nice things about the podcast on Facebook and wherever else she talked about it. I really do appreciate everyone that gives really nice comments, has questions or whatever. It's nice to hear from you. You can follow me on Facebook at Bunny Hugs and Mental Health, and on Instagram, and it's Daddy Cries Book. And yeah, if you like the podcast and you're listening to it on Apple, you can leave a review or a rating. That's what it's called. Okay, now, without further ado, I'd like to present to you Kayleigh Lafontaine.
I am the new executive director of the Elizabeth Fry Society of Saskatchewan.
And what exactly is that?
We are a charity nonprofit organization that is women led and women centered. Our focus is on advocacy and support for women, girls, and LGBTQ Two-Spirit Plus individuals who are in conflict with the law.
So what made you want to be part of that, let alone the director?
It's been a bit of a journey, definitely. So I actually come from a background of working as a frontline correctional officer. So I started my career in corrections at the age of 21, and I had given university a shot and it wasn't for me, and I had moved back home. So I'm currently living in Saskatchewan, but I was raised and I'm from the Paw, Manitoba. I'm not sure if you're familiar.
I've heard of it.
It's always a pause when you ask somebody if they know where it is, because it's a very unique community. It has a bad rep, that's for sure.
Oh, is that right?
It does. It's like if you were to ask somebody in probably the 70s or 80s, it was a really tough community. Whether you were visiting it or living in it, it's always kind of been a rough little town. Yeah, so I had moved to Saskatchewan and tried university, and then that didn't work out, so I moved back home and I got into corrections. And I actually come from a line of correctional officers. My stepdad and my biological dad actually worked together back in the 80s. And like the list goes on, like my grandfather, my uncle, my aunts, like everybody that was sort of in my life. I grew up around correctional officers and
Hmm.
like the culture of that. And I decided to give it a shot. I started the training in 2008, April 2008. It was like the first time in my life I had like really excelled at anything. I had gotten 90s and I was like valedictorian of the graduating class that we had. And yeah, it was quite interesting. So yeah, like that's been my primary career. I've worked in many institutions. I've worked in 4 separate institutions, as well as a halfway house, just formerly known as the CTRs, but it was called community training residents. They're now considered reintegration units. So I worked at the women's reintegration unit for the provincial government. So it's a low custody housing arrangement so that women can reintegrate back into the community after incarceration.
Hmm. So in your hometown, what is it, the Paw? Is there a jail there? Is that why you had so much family working in corrections?
Yeah, so in Manitoba, as far as like correctional facilities and the way that the population is heavily we're heavily populated throughout the south. So major cities like Brandon and Winnipeg, that's where you would find most of the correctional centers.
Right.
But in Manitoba, they had one small one that was like kind of a low custody in Dauphin, Manitoba. And then the most northern institution was this small little jail in the Paw that had women, men, and youth all under the same roof. And
Hmm.
that's very uncommon. Like, we don't have anything like that here. It was, I mean, they were all in separate units at that point. I think it was sometime in the 80s they stopped letting the men and women have outside recreation together for obvious reasons.
Oh, recreation, is that what you call it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that the only place in Manitoba that you worked in? Or like once you moved to...
Yeah. Yeah. So I worked there for 3 years. Typically at that time, so about 2011, or what I was seeing in provincial corrections when I was applying, is there was pretty much only people with post-secondary degrees getting hired on frontline. It was very rare for them to hire somebody without a degree. But because I had worked in a center before and I had my 3 years of experience, I was able to get employment at the Saskatoon Correctional Center.
Hmm.
So that was the reason I moved back to Saskatoon, was to work there. And so you may be familiar, but that's one of our larger men's institutions in Saskatchewan.
I actually didn't know that. I don't know much about jail at all.
I think you'll find through our conversation that it heavily correlates with mental health, with a lot, like there's a lot of mental health struggles that I've seen over the years through people who are incarcerated and through people who work as frontline staff in correctional facilities. And yeah, so when I had heard your podcast, that was like a light bulb that sort of came off for me, where it was like, this is something that people need to talk about, and I don't hear anybody really talking about it.
No, you don't. And I appreciate you reaching out, because it's something I never thought about, as a subject for an episode. But as soon as you left a message and I read it, I was like, damn, that's a great idea. So, and plus you said some very nice comments to me about the podcast, which I really appreciate. So really, that's the only reason why you're on here tonight. No, I'm kidding. So yeah, explain a little more about the mental health aspect. Maybe start with the staff.
Yeah. And I mean, like, this is strongly tied to the work that I'm doing now. But I say as a disclaimer, like, I'm on the podcast today really representing myself as a person. So my opinions I'm not, no, I don't want to lead on my opinions. I sort of want to highlight some of the the things that I've experienced over the years. So my personal experiences, and I
Right.
understand that those experiences are different, and they vary with other people. But
Right.
um, yeah, staff, there's a culture that comes with being a correctional officer. It's like being part of a club that you don't have people who don't do that work. Like people who don't do that work don't quite understand sort of the culture that comes along with it.
Right.
There's a sense of family because you're doing a really tough job and you're going through tough situations with those people, and there's bond that is really strong throughout people who work in that line of work. And I think we see that, right, very similarly with people who work in policing or military and those kinds of things. Yeah, I think there's a correlation there for sure.
Right.
And I say that some of the people I love more than ever in my life, have been people who I've met through working on the front lines in corrections. I think that there is something to be said about the amount of people who end up, ending their careers due to medical issues or mental health leaves. And there's a whole layer that a lot of the public doesn't realize.
Yeah. Well, I actually had a friend that worked at the PA pen for a little bit, and I think he trained longer than he actually worked there for. Like, it didn't take him long before he was like, yeah, this is not good for me.
Yeah, yeah, I don't think it's good for anybody, but people do it, and I can't blame them for doing it. I stayed in that job for, like I said, almost just under 12 years. There's something that keeps you there, like it's a good job. And when you're training, there's an emphasis that the government, and this I've found in my experiences, whether I'm speaking with people in federal institutions or from Manitoba or from Saskatchewan, there's a real sense of the government believing that they're helping people
Hmm.
who are incarcerated. And I believe that there are people who are helping people, but I don't believe the system is helping anybody.
Right.
I don't believe that the way that our system is designed, that it's serving anyone who is in need of help. And anyone who's criminalized is in need of help.
Right.
Whether they're willing to receive that help or not, whether they've made those decisions for those crimes, whether it was an accident or whatever the circumstances are, those people need help. How are we providing it to them? And I think what's really important is like, what's the lens that they're seeing the world in by the way that they are treated because of their actions.
Right. I talked to Police Chief Evan Bray a while ago, and we were talking about just how many people are in jail because of addictions. There's spousal abuse, there's drinking and driving, there's trafficking, and there's burglaries, and there's on and on and on because of addictions. And if you're asking me, I've worked in addictions, I'm in recovery. Those people are sick, they need help, like you said. And I bet you, like I said, I don't work in jails or anything, but you think of crimes like that, that's probably 80% of the people in jail are because of crimes like that. So if you can help those people with addictions, just that alone, you could bring down the crime rate and bring down, having all those people in cages.
Absolutely. When the government announced that they were going to be putting this $50+ million into a new remand center in Saskatoon, when that first was released, I felt relief. And I felt relief because I know how dangerous jails are. I know that they're overcrowded. I know that there is a boiling point of environment that people are walking into and people are living in right now that, isn't safe for anyone. So my first thought was there would be more room. But now I'm in a different position and I understand more, and I'm constantly learning. If you would have told me 3 years ago that I would now be the executive director of an organization that's based on prison abolition, then I wouldn't have believed you. But the growth that I've got, like, I wouldn't have. It's period. It's like full stop. I wouldn't
Yeah.
have believed that, right? And I don't think I would have been able to walk out of, my position as a frontline CO and walk into this job. Like, that wouldn't happen.
Yeah.
And it's really been the journey that I've been on in the last 3 years. Like, I've had 4 job interviews in 3 years, and I'm really thankful because I've gotten all of those jobs.
Huh.
It's been a journey. Like, it's been a lot to get here.
So with staffing, because we're kind of on the staff part of it, have you seen, like, I know you're not a psychiatrist or a psychologist, but have you seen like PTSD in some frontline workers? And do you think or have you been diagnosed with anything like that?
Yeah, that's such a tough question. It's so tough to answer because I actually smudged before our chat because I really needed to make sure that I had the courage to talk about this because it's really, really tough. I say with like certainty, there is so many people that are affected by trauma. And I can't diagnose myself and I can't diagnose anyone, but I have found through my journey of healing over the last few years sort of triggers in myself where I've really seen that trauma lives there and that's a result of the work that I did for so long. When you're working in that kind of environment, you're always on guard, right? You're always heightened. You're constantly waiting for the shoe to drop, for the code to be called, for next time that you have to save somebody's life or break up a fight or attend a unit that's under gang wars or a riot or all of these things that, people don't realize is going on in
Right.
this. It's like a sub world. Like, and when you are a part of it, then it exists. But then you go into the real world and you're like, people are talking about just really mundane things. And you're like, but this is what happened to me yesterday, or this is what I saw, or,
Yeah.
And even more importantly, and I mean, we will get to this topic as well, but more importantly, like what people go through when they're incarcerated.
I mean, I don't want to trigger you, and I'm not going to ask you the most awful thing you ever saw or whatever. If you want to talk about that stuff, that's great. But I can imagine, well, even in working in addictions in a treatment center, I mean, there's no big fights or anything, but, drama can happen. So I can imagine working in a prison, because in the treatment center, it was like for 4 or 5 days, it's really quiet. Everyone's behaving. And it's like you said, you're waiting for the shoe to drop. Like, everyone's like, it's a little too quiet. Yeah. What's going on? It's like, you can't even enjoy the downtime.
Yeah. And then the full moon comes out.
Yeah.
I was talking about something as far as there was somebody that I've known through my career who recently passed, and I was sort of discussing the details out loud to my partner as we were driving. It was like really graphic, and I didn't really realize what I was doing. And then he's like, "I'm not desensitized like you are." Like, oh, that is a very fair point that I'm talking about this, so it's like, I do that sometimes and I kind of forget about the shock factor of it.
Yeah. Was the person you're talking about like a staff member or like a client in the...
A client in the community. So she was somebody that I knew through working in the front line, but she has utilized our services with our organization in the past as well. But it was the recent hit and run that's been in the news as far as Saskatoon. She was a young woman who been hit by a car and she was pregnant, and
Oh.
it actually just happened a few blocks from our house, so that's why I was talking about it. And just really sad that that happened, because I can't speak for her and I haven't seen her in years, but it it sounded like, like this was her first child and this really could have been a turning point for her. So
Hmm.
that's really sad.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I just found out recently I'm not going, but like I worked at Pine Lodge and we've been shut down because of a fire, COVID, and all this crap. But I've kind of had to move on because I was laid off, so I've got a different job. So I'm not working in addictions anymore. But uh, sitting back and thinking about my last couple of years working there, like I live in a small town, and other people talk about their jobs and stuff, and it's like, yeah, people I work with, a lot of them are, they're found frozen in the snow or murdered or overdosed. It is a weird job. Like
Yeah,
the job working in, in corrections, it's not
it's
something.
weird.
Yeah, it is weird.
It's weird. My favorite thing, and this has happened to me countless times, where somebody says, "Oh, like, what do you do?" And I'm like, "Oh, I work in corrections." And I'm like, so like admin, or people have been asking me if I was a janitor before. I'm like, I'm no, like I work on I wear a uniform. I was like in the front lines.
You get attached to people that are, the most vulnerable people in our society, people that, other people look at and frown upon them, and you get attached to these people, and so it's just weird. It's all just very weird. I mean, it's rewarding.
Yeah,
Addictions,
absolutely.
anyway. I can't say for you,
Yeah.
but
Well, and that's, you know what, that's exactly why I'm in the position that I'm in now today. Because I went from the Paul Correctional Center to Saskatoon. I then went in 2014 to Pine Grove Correctional Center. I really, really loved working with the women.
yeah,
The women, it's completely different. They have a whole different set of needs. They have a whole different set of barriers. It's, in my opinion, it's almost a bit more hostile and dangerous sometimes with the women
yeah,
than it is with the men. Working the front lines of men's corrections, there's like a code, and most of the time men don't attack female guards, but like it's all fair game when you're working with women, right? Like it's, I say that with a laugh because I know that it just sounds funny, but it's there's truth to it, right?
yeah, yeah. We've had a lot of clients come from Pine Grove.
Yeah, and I've had many people, that I've cared about go to Pine Lodge as well. So I mean, there's probably some folks we both know, but we don't even realize.
Yeah, yeah. So we've kind of discussed what it's like being on the staff side of it and the mental health. So I mean, you've never been incarcerated, I don't think, but you've seen what it's like to be incarcerated. Maybe talk a little bit about the mental health of, some of the people incarcerated.
It's hard to summarize what I've seen as far as the state that I've seen people in. It's a different perspective now that I'm on the other side of it. I think that there's so much to that job that I understand why they believe it's necessary, and I believed it for a very long time. As simple as a strip search.
Mm-hmm.
When you're first incarcerated and you first go in, whether you've been there before, whether it's your first time in jail, like whether it doesn't bother you or whether you're crying uncontrollably and can't function, you have to do a strip search. So a CO would request your clothing, and one by one, then you have to do all of the motions in order to make sure that that person, sees that you don't have anything on you.
Mm-hmm.
And I've done probably hundreds of those.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard because I'm in a place where I now I look back on things like that and I really try to put myself in the shoes of that person and the vulnerability and, you know, being scared and like sort of having to shut that off. And you don't know who is a victim of assault or sexual assault or anything that they've been dealt in their life. And, you know, I've seen some people who've really, really struggled with that. And it's necessary, right? They deem that it's necessary to happen, but
Right.
it's really difficult to do, and it's probably 100 times more difficult to have done.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's awful, and it would be very violating feeling. But at the same time, I mean, they could be bringing in dangerous things. So I guess ultimately it's for the safety of everyone, but it's also sounds awful.
Yeah, and it is awful. And like,
And that's just day one.
yeah, that's like that's just your first couple minutes in the door, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, and so like some other things too is like solitary confinement, you know, like being a part of that system and saying like, okay, that person is a danger to us, they're a danger to themselves, they have to be confined. That all used to make sense to me. And it makes me sad now,
Hmm.
you know? And I say that knowing that people I love and care about could hear this and they can say like, like you know how hard it is. And yes, I do. I do know how hard it is. Um, but I don't think that means that it's right. And now that I've been in the community and now that I've seen other ways that you can help people grow, like that's why I'm doing what I'm doing, because I really want to be able to intervene in people's lives before they have to even be incarcerated.
Right.
I want us to be in a community that has a place for somebody to go directly when they're at their breaking point so that they can heal and they can transform and then they can take care of the trauma that they're holding on to so that they don't harm themselves or others.
Right. And really expand their trauma by going to prison and dealing with all the whatever happens in there.
That's what I now know about prison abolition. Like, let's abolish prisons, and that's not going to happen tomorrow. That's probably not going to happen in 100 years, but how do we get there? We build more homes and we build more communities that have space for the people who feel like they don't have space. And not just the people that don't feel like they have the places that there are not space for those people, right? Like, and I've experienced, you know, I've witnessed that, not experienced it, I've witnessed that through my career as well, where somebody is trying to do their absolute best to get ahead and change their life around, and they can't get a place to live because they don't have landlord references, and they just got out of jail, and the barriers of you can't call a landlord up and say, hey, I'm just getting out of jail on Thursday, can I come and rent your place? Like,
Yeah.
no, you know
Yeah.
you can't. So I guess what I haven't shared is that when I went, so I went to the reintegration unit, and that was like transformative for me. I was out of uniform. I was still a CO, but I was just working in my normal clothes, and it was a house with 14 residents, and it was a game changer. We were doing things with them that really focused on their healing and focused on how to get them to a place where they're able to be self-sufficient. And it was just like I was in love. I was in love with being able to help them in this way, was in love with the people that I was connecting with. Like one of the individuals who's on like the first person kind of on my caseload, like she's somebody I'm still cheering on, and I'm so proud of her, and I still have her in my life. And like I remember the first time I added somebody who'd been incarcerated on Facebook. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's not something that you can do as a CO, right? But as soon as
Mm-hmm.
I had transitioned from that job, I was able to connect with her again. with a few individuals who mean a lot to me, and I love them. I love them so much, and they're women, and they're, like they're mothers, and they're just individuals who like had a really rough go,
Mm.
and they just want what's best in life. Things are really hard, right?
Hmm.
And we shouldn't fault them on that.
I couldn't imagine being like a father, let alone a mother with young children and being incarcerated. Like that alone must be, traumatizing.
Yeah. And you're looking at, like, I don't have the Stats Canada stats in front of me.
Yeah.
Um, but I I can safely say like 60 to 80% of, women who are incarcerated nationally and provincially are mothers,
Hmm.
and that is, that's affecting that generational trauma as well.
That's right. Yeah. So, what are some other solutions you think? Like you said housing. Um, well, I'm thinking more like for gangs because I know a lot of gang violence and stuff. Like I
Well,
don't know.
gangs are, that's really interesting. So gangs I've seen, I've never been in a gang. I've been propositioned to join one more than once.
While you were CO,
Yeah,
well, I guess yeah, I'm sure they have.
I always said no. I've always really, like, in my job, I've always been myself. So I've always kind of just been like funny and joking around, and yeah.
Yeah.
There's, like, been a couple of times where someone's like, like, I really think you'd be good at this. I'm like, no, I think I'm good at this. So it's okay.
Well, that's nice. That must be flattering.
So flattering. Yeah.
You like
Which
me
I'm
so much, you
sure,
want me in
like,
your gang?
if honestly, like, if I was, born back in the day, like, I probably could have ran a brothel. Like, that's really what my personality is. I don't think anybody would dispute that. Um,
So, how do you solve some of the gang stuff so that they don't have to go to jail? Like, as someone who's on the director of a foundation, what are you, a foundation, a group? I don't know, to abolish prison.
you're like, who are you again? Why are we talking? It's Friday. Um, uh, you know, we don't have a strong focus right now on gangs, but Straight Up, which is an organization,
Hmm.
um, is really strongly rooted in that. And I think their format is like they have people who have transitioned out of that lifestyle, and then it's very peer centered, and I think that's really important. I think that's
Right.
really important in my line of work with our organization as well, to have those peers, for them to see that representation of people who've been in their shoes, so to speak.
Right. Some former gang members I've talked to were Indigenous, and what really helped them heal was really embracing their culture and like starting to do a lot more of their traditional things, talking to elders, doing sweats, and like really embracing the culture that they got away from it a bit, being in the gangs and stuff, and they found that really healing and helpful when transitioning out of gangs.
Absolutely. Culture, and so I'm have Indigenous heritage. I'm on a journey right now, so I'm not really comfortable saying Métis. I've always said Métis, but I really want to explore my genealogy before I say that, because I don't really know if I have those Red River ties.
Hmm.
But my father was half Indigenous, so he didn't have a connection with his father. So I don't really know that side. I just know that he was from sort of the Red Deer area. But my father would have been status if he had had that connection with his dad. And my mother is status, so her and her mother both have their treaty cards, and they are members of Opaskwayak Cree Nation, which sits right next to the paw.
Hmm.
Um, but
Do you know what treaty land that is?
That's Treaty 5.
Hmm. I'm on Treaty 4.
Yeah, I am on.
I was here first. No, I don't know. Beat you by one.
I'm just.
Sorry, I cut you off again.
No, that's okay. I'm just like, is it Treaty 5? I'm like very certain that it is. And anyway, so Indigenous culture. So what I was gonna say, we're tying that in. Yeah, like I don't have a lot of strong cultural ties, or I hadn't until this point in my life. Um, but I saw a lot of culture through my career, and I've seen that just really be transformative for people, time and time again. And I mean, it's been transformative for myself as I connect more and more to it. Yeah, when you don't know that part of you, I think as you connect and things start to make sense, and like Indigenous culture is so beautiful, and it's there's so many variants to it, and so much of that was lost, but I'm just like, I love seeing people honoring their cultures and learning more, and that it's becoming more mainstream to see that is just like, I think we're in a really beautiful time, because that wasn't the case when I was growing up,
Right.
especially like in the community that I grew up with. Racism was strong and alive, and I'll name it. Like my dad lived on the reserve and my mom lived in the paw, and like I remember getting the shit kicked out of me because I was like too white when I'd go visit my dad on the reserve. And like there was culture there, it was right in front of me, there was powwows constantly, and ceremony, and I was never invited to be a part of that, and I never thought I would. I never thought it was my place, but like it was my place, and I'm just learning that now. And I see that a lot with some of my peers that are kind of my age group and are now looking into their culture.
Do you mind me asking how old you are?
I had to think about that. I'm 35.
Oh, okay.
I was like, how old am I?
Well, I'm 43, and I remember the residential school a couple towns down was still running, like it was still fully operational. And so it hasn't been that long that, people are encouraged to embrace their Indigenous culture. It was still, they were trying to take it away still when I was a kid, and I'm not that old.
Yeah. And I mean, both sides of my family were really affected by that generational trauma and that disconnection with their culture.
Well, that's another episode I want to do, actually, is the mental health
I was
based
just
around
going to
that.
say that is a whole other episode.
Well, that's what I find with these episodes is like, you kind of start off on one theme and it's like, man, you can just, you come up with 10 other themes within the one episode.
Yeah. Yeah. And so on Indigenous culture and incarceration, like something that's really wonderful. And I actually cannot wait to go down and connect with them. But there's healing lodges within the federal system. So in Saskatchewan, we have the Okama Ochi Healing Lodge, which is a women's lodge federally.
I used to hear about sentencing circles. I don't hear that as much.
I'm not strongly, like, I'm not as familiar with the federal system as I am with the provincial, but I haven't heard of sentencing circles for a long time either. That's where like the elders, right, come.
Yeah, instead of like a judge. Yeah, I mean, that's a brilliant idea. Like I said, like anyone I've ever met that embraces their culture really do heal and, become a member of the community again. And so why not encourage the healing lodges, sentencing circles and things? I mean, that's the best way to go from a criminal to really getting into your culture. Anyway, not everyone thinks like me, though.
Well, we just need to start changing people's minds. And I think that's what is important, right? And that's why we're talking about it. The more we talk about it, the more it's going to resonate with people.
So here's something. I mean, if you watch any TV show, we kind of talked about being incarcerated and the mental health issues and what could cause mental health issues. I mean, I don't know much about prison, but I've seen enough TV that I don't need to. We don't have to nitpick every trauma in prison to get it. But the last year must have been hell with COVID and being staffed and being incarcerated, and just that whole fear and the stress and the masks and the temperature taking, like all that crap is just must have been
horrible.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I can imagine it, and that's why it scares me, because it cannot be easy. Currently, right now, we have an outbreak of COVID in the women's correctional facility. There's 9, I hate the word inmates.
Yeah.
That's my own. Yeah, I use clients now too. I mean, there are 9 individuals who are incarcerated that are COVID positive at this time, and then there are 7 staff currently at Pine Grove Correctional Center.
I know Saskatchewan had a bad outbreak this winter or fall or whatever it was.
And so has Regina. Like, Regina had a really bad one just recently.
Yeah, my cousin works there, and he ended up getting COVID. So yeah, there's all that stress on top of just the nightmare stress the job already has.
Yeah, and so what that looks like too, as far as being incarcerated. So when you come into custody, you're tested, but you're also quarantined for 14 days. And on top of that, if because of the lack of room, they move somebody into your room, then you have to continue to quarantine until their 14 days is up.
Oh my God.
I mean, I want to advocate for that to not happen, but I also don't know, how does that not happen if they have to quarantine them? Where do you put people?
Yeah.
It's so hard, right?
Well, there's a lot of police chiefs trying to legalize, small quantities of drugs, so that would definitely, make some space.
Well, and it's the advocacy needs to be towards the court system. We have to look at the courts. They're making the decisions that a lot of people have to be remanded. That's a whole other thing, is that we have. So I'll use Pine Grove as an example, because that's who our organization works with the most. But out of approximately 190 individuals, 60 of those people are sentenced. So the rest of them are just awaiting trial and sentencing. That's a lot of people. That's a lot of moms in our province that are just sitting in jail cells right now. Yeah.
I had no idea.
Remand numbers across the boards is, yeah. Again, I see why you wouldn't have an idea, because I don't think the general public really understands that. They're just yeah, people are in jail, and I'm sure they belong there. But that's not always the case. And I have seen an increase in the remand population in centers, and it's not good for anybody. Because there's a lack of programming when it comes to being remanded. Because you're not sentenced, they can't
offer you services?
In a nutshell, Todd, honestly, because they can't calculate your certain risk factors, and I'm doing a bad job of quoting it, and I shouldn't, because it's my job.
I know what you're saying, but
yeah, there's a huge lack of remand programming. So there's just people who are sitting in jails, and they're not getting any help.
So what's the longest you can sit in remand? Or what's the longest you've heard of someone sitting? Years?
I saw a man sit in remand for 5 years before he was sentenced for, I believe, manslaughter.
What? 5 years?
5 years.
And they weren't even sentenced yet?
No. And that's, yeah. And so when you're remanded, you're always in the provincial system. right? Like federal's only sentenced. Um,
Oh,
so so I'm not sure if you know this, but like, so when you're sentenced, if you get 2 years plus a day, then you go to a federal institution. If you get 2 years minus a day, then you stay within your province and you do your provincial incarceration.
man. Like the stress of that alone, let alone all the stuff that happens in jail, plus COVID.
Yeah.
My
Yeah.
God.
And before COVID, you'd have family visiting. Like our organization would be in Pine Grove every 2 weeks. So every Friday, every second Friday, we would be in there and we'd be walking from, and I haven't obviously gotten to do this yet because I started just recently. Um, I've been with the organization since October, but in my new job since April. But EFRI for a very long time has been, EFRI is sorry, short for Elizabeth Fry, has been doing institutional visits provincially, like before it was weekly and then it was bi-weekly for years and years. So we would go and we'd actually sit and connect, and then that would really be able to enhance the ability for us to help individuals who are there and for them to really feel like, they weren't alone in that process. But that hasn't been the case for the last 14 months.
Hmm.
And I do have a good sort of working relationship with the director, and she does want us to go back to those visits, but it's going to be probably still a while before the ministry allows us to return.
Right. How often do you think, I think I know the answer, but how often do you think the ministry, because I mean, it's always a different minister, like every couple of years there's a cabinet shuffle and stuff, but how often do you think that a minister makes educated decisions by consulting with frontline workers?
In my position now, I feel even strong. Like, yeah, I would absolutely love if that was the case. I don't think it happens very often, if at all.
Hmm.
Um,
I knew that was the answer.
I just recently said this to somebody too. Like, I'm in a weird place, right? Like, because I'm like now in this whole world where I'm talking to educators and people about prison rights and the things that are happening in prisons and in jails and all of this stuff. But there's not really anyone in this sphere that has worked on the front lines that I'm really like seeing or connecting with. There's bits and pieces here and there, but there's not a lot of crossover. So like this thing that I'm doing is really unique, and I don't know that you know, it's happened a whole lot where somebody's worked that long on the front lines and now are in the position that I'm in. But
It makes sense though. Like, who knows better what it's like day to day in a place like that than someone like you? And
yeah,
if you think it should be abolished, then you know.
well, and I think we keep working on it until we get there, right? And I'm hoping, as I like have just started in this role, I'm hoping as I reach out to ministers, because I will be reaching out to them, that we're going to be able to have those conversations. I've been lucky in a lot of circumstances so far. Again, it's been 5 weeks, but I've had a lot of people show their support for me being in this position, which also feels very weird. And I have a lot of imposter syndrome a lot of the time because I never ever imagined that there was a seat for me at this table. And that's what really held me back from kind of meshing those two worlds. So yeah, like I don't think that the governments are really listening and speaking directly to the people who are on the front lines or the people who are incarcerated. I think those voices are really important. So
Yeah.
that's my job, right? That's my job, is I have to elevate those voices and make sure that those stories and opinions are heard.
So when you say you're getting a lot of good feedback and stuff about the position you're in now, is that like from politicians or from
Yeah, well, just as I connect more and more with people, like, so I'm connecting now with a lot of either directors or wardens
Mm,
through corrections.
gotcha.
Um, I'm connecting with community partners and leaders of organizations, and um, I've had just before I started this. So just before I started as executive director, I wrote a little letter to social services because they pissed me off over a client. I posted it on our Facebook page, on our organization's Facebook page, and I was really mad because I had a client who was in like really, really desperate need of housing. So that's what okay, so I keep almost mentioning this and then I don't. But after the halfway house that I worked at, I then worked at social services for 10 months. So that was my last stop in the government. I worked at income assistance social services, and that was another light bulb that really showed me sort of the disconnection between those two ministries and how it's really imperative for those two ministries to work together in
Mm,
order for the people who are marginalized and utilizing their, I don't want to say services as far as incarceration, but services as far as income assistance.
mm,
The people who are going in and out of those systems, like there is not a lot of chatter back and forth. And I think that's that's a conversation I really want to have. But when I did write this letter, I had um, the Minister of Social Services had reached out to me, and things happened really quickly because I had written that letter. So
good.
um, yeah, and that reminds me, I need to write her office a letter again so that I could possibly have a conversation. Uh,
That doesn't happen too often.
yeah, it feels really weird most of the time. I'm not gonna lie.
Well, I created a what the hell you call it? A petition to create a minister of not agriculture, a petition to create a minister of mental health and addiction, and they just created one not too long ago here, and I was like, it is weird. It's like, did I have a part in that? Did I?
That's amazing. I was
You
just
know,
gonna say, like, did they just do that? And I guess I didn't even realize that they didn't do that before. So that's amazing.
well, the problem is he's. I don't want to get too political, but
I know we have to be nice, right? That's the problem.
yeah, I mean, there's a guy there, and he's got that title. I don't know how much how long of a leash they're giving him, but you know what I mean.
Well, Todd, I worked for the government for a long time, so you need to say no more. I understand.
Yeah, it might just be a PR thing. I don't know. I don't know, but I hope they prove me wrong. They haven't yet, but I hope they do soon.
I hope so too. I really do. And
I, I actually believe he has a good heart and he wants to do the right thing. It's just, politics and, maybe you should run for MLA.
oh my gosh.
Talk about
Oh,
mental health issues.
yeah, that's exactly. You know what? In 5 years, maybe I will.
I've considered it, but
who who knows what'll happen? Honestly, being in the position that I'm in now, like imagine that I didn't allow myself for a very long time to dream outside of my own confinement in my career, if that makes sense.
it
Yeah,
does.
I really I didn't have a formal education. I didn't believe I could do anything other than that. I thought, hey, I'm pretty nice to people and I'm okay at this job. But then I woke up one day and I was like, shit, my body really hurts. And I'm like hitting a breaking point. And if I don't leave right away, like I'm probably in trouble. That's the thing too. Like I will be honest, like I've struggled a lot mentally and physically over the course of the probably the last 5 years of this journey. And it was for me a life or death decision. Like I
Mm-hmm.
needed to get out. I was at one point. had like thought about applying to Dark Side Donuts to just like go work and make donuts. Like I'm like, how can I get out of this? Like how can I pay my bills
Mm-hmm.
so that I don't have to be reliant on this job that is killing me?
Well, there's no worse feeling than feeling stuck.
Yeah.
Is there anything you wanted to add before you leave?
If you are someone or you know somebody who is either in front of the courts or they're incarcerated or working off fines, anything like that, anything to do with the justice system, then please reach out to myself and or our office. We have some really, really amazing women that work in our office. I'm really lucky.
Thank you, Kayleigh, so much for that. I learned quite a bit about prison and prison system and the mental health challenges, not just from staff, but also those incarcerated. So I really, really appreciate your time, and I just appreciate being educated a little bit. Now, next week, it's another great episode, another interesting one, it's a pretty heavy one. I am speaking to Erin Goodpipe. She is an Indigenous woman from Saskatchewan, now living in Vancouver, and we're going to talk about intergenerational trauma, and not just amongst the whole Indigenous communities, but also within her own family, and some of the mental health challenges that people struggle with, Indigenous people struggle with because of the intergenerational traumas. So it's a heavy subject, but she's such a lovely lady, and she's so willing to talk about it and share that it's really amazing. In fact, I think I'm going to make it a two-parter. We talked for quite a while, and I'd instead of a really long episode, I think I'd like to make two smaller ones. So stay tuned for that. Thank you for listening, and please subscribe, rate, and review however you are listening to this podcast. It only takes a moment, and it really helps the show out with getting noticed. This episode has been sponsored by Penny University Bookstore, 3104 13th Avenue. Call 639-571-2186 and check out their online bookstore at pennyu.ca. The Saskatchewan Podcast Network is supported by Connexus. Wellness, however you define it, is achievable. You don't even need to figure it all out by yourself. Talk to Connexus. They'll give you guidance, motivation, and the push you need to reach your goals. They've got you. They're your financial partner, and they know you can achieve your very best, your financial best. Prove them right. Start right at Connexus Credit Union. The Saskatchewan Podcast Network is also sponsored by Direct West. Are you a business owner looking for new avenues to promote your business? Direct West digital billboards are a great opportunity to highlight a new product, new promotion, or anything else you'd like your customers to know about. You can get local, expert marketing help for your business at directwest.com. If you are having a mental health crisis, please call the Canadian Crisis number at 1-833-456-4566. In Saskatchewan, the mobile crisis team in Prince Albert is 306-764-1011. In Regina, it's 306-525-5333, and in Saskatoon, it's 306-933-6200. Don't forget to check out my children's book, Sometimes Daddy Cries. Sometimes Daddy Cries is told through the eyes of a boy whose father suffers from depression. He sees his dad get sad, rest, and even go to the hospital, all while comparing his father's depression to a physical ailment. Available on Amazon.ca. I'll see you next time. This is Todd Redebaum saying, make your beds and take your meds. Bye.